There are moments in the history of European civilization that we perceive as inevitable, as predestined triumphs or defeats. The year 1588, when the colossal Spanish Armada of King Philip II set sail for the shores of England, was such a turning point. Our modern history is based on a miraculous rescue. England, a small, financially weakened island kingdom, was able to repel the invasion, and its success was then cemented by fierce storms that destroyed the remnants of the Spanish fleet. This outcome was not just a victory, it gave rise to a new world order. It established Protestantism in the British Isles, launched English and then British maritime hegemony, paved the way for Protestant colonization of North America, and, crucially, decentralized the European balance of power, laying the foundations for the competition that ultimately led to the Industrial Revolution. We live in a world created precisely by the defeat of the Armada. Let us imagine that the chain of events had unfolded differently. What if Medina Sidonia had avoided panic after the attack by the fireships at Gravelines, and the Protestant wind had not come at all? What if the Duke of Parma had been able to safely transfer his hardened army aboard Spanish ships? This is a scenario in which Tudor England would have fallen under the onslaught of Spanish tercios, and a long era of Catholic restoration would have begun. The result would have been the disappearance of British naval hegemony, a completely different, deeply Catholic colonization of America, and a radically reversed balance of power in Europe, where the Pax Hispanica would have been established for several centuries. Watch the video to the end to find out how the history of the conquest of England by the Spanish Armada might have changed. In order to appreciate the scale of this hypothetical turn of events, it is necessary to understand in detail the real context of 1588, when Europe was a continent torn apart by religious and political wars, but with a clear hegemon, since the Spanish Empire, thanks to its union with Portugal, effectively controlled both global oceans and colossal resources. The silver mines of Potosi in Peru and the mines of Mexico supplied Seville with annual flows of precious metal, which financed the largest army in the world, the famous tercios. This army, consisting of professional soldiers, was a symbol of land power, and its logistical machine, despite all the difficulties, was the most efficient at the time. At the same time, Spain's economy suffered from a paradox. The abundance of gold caused inflation, and the state itself was prone to conservatism and bureaucratic sluggishness, which hampered the development of domestic industry. Against this backdrop, England looked like a dangerous but seemingly regional adversary, as Elizabeth I ruled a country with a population of only about 4 million people, which did not have its own standing army. And the crown's finances were strained, but at the same time, English culture was more dynamic, risk-oriented, and entrepreneurial. It was in England that state piracy flourished. Private captains, such as Francis Drake, acted on behalf of the crown, plundering Spanish colonies and the Silver Fleets. And these actions, along with active support for the Protestant uprising in the Netherlands, were a direct challenge to Spanish power and were the main reason that prompted Philip II to invade. The naval forces of the two powers were fundamentally different. The Spanish Armada was built on the Mediterranean model. Its ships were tall, with large superstructures designed primarily for transporting troops and subsequent boarding. Hand-to-hand combat on the enemy's deck. The English fleet, on the other hand, consisted of lower, more maneuverable, and faster ships equipped with heavier and longer-range ship cannons. And the English sought to engage in artillery combat at a distance, avoiding boarding, in which the Spanish tercios would be invincible. Thus, England was a civilization of sailors and merchants, opposed by Spain, a civilization of soldiers and bureaucrats. The key vulnerability of the Spanish plan was its critical dependence on meeting up with the Duke of Parma's land army. These 30,000 experienced soldiers were in Flanders, but their ports were shallow and blocked by the Dutch rebel fleet. The Armada needed not only to clear the English fleet from the English Channel, but also to hold its position long enough to ensure a complex, hours-long operation to transfer troops from shore to large galleons. If this logistical knot had been resolved, the difference in forces on land 18,000 Spanish soldiers against the English militia, would have been overwhelming. And although we know from history that neither the weather nor logistics worked in Philip II's favor, an alternative trajectory depended only on a few days of calm weather and better coordination. Let us imagine that there was a slight but fatal shift in circumstances for England, and during several days of naval battles in the English Channel and at Gravelines, where the English launched their main attack, the Spanish admiral, the Duke of Medina Sidonia, managed to show uncharacteristic persistence and tactical composure. Perhaps his disciplined captains were able to successfully neutralize or repel the attack of the fireships. Or perhaps the English cannons were unable to inflict critical damage on the Spanish galleons, and the Armada fleet, maintaining its crescent formation, did not scatter. The most decisive factor that turned history upside down was the weather. Instead of a fierce storm from the west, which in our reality destroyed the Armada, a steady, moderate southeast wind set in. This Catholic wind was a blessing for the Spanish. First, it prevented the English fleet, which was more maneuverable in headwinds, from attacking freely and maintaining distance. Second, it provided ideal conditions for the most difficult element of the plan, the encounter with Parma. The Duke of Parma, having received a clear signal that the English and Dutch blockade ships, which may have been neutralized by a new, smaller storm or distracted, had temporarily cleared the English Channel, immediately began transferring his tercios. Using numerous flat-bottom boats, his army of 15,000–20,000 elite soldiers, hardened by many years of war in the Netherlands, transferred to large transport ships and, finally, to the galleons of the Armada. This would be one of the most complex logistical operations of the century, but thanks to perfect weather and discipline, it succeeds. Instead of being a passive target, the Armada became a floating bastion, carrying an invincible land army on board. Under the threat of this combined force, the English fleet, realizing its inability to engage in artillery combat against a fortified enemy or prevent the landing, is forced to retreat to protect its main bases or is scattered altogether, suffering losses. Medina Sidonia, controlling the strait, leads his fleet to the mouth of the Thames or the coast of Kent, and the landing proceeds relatively unhindered, with Spanish tercios disembarking on English soil. The fate of England is decided in the first few days, as the English militia, hastily assembled and led by lords, has neither the training nor the experience to oppose the professional tercios, who operate in strict battle order, using pikes and arquebuses with machine-like precision. Any attempt at a field battle ends in defeat for the English, and London, lacking sufficient fortifications, is threatened with siege. Queen Elizabeth of Fernand, either captured while attempting to flee north or forced to surrender after the fall of the capital, becomes a prisoner in this single, critical logistical success. The meeting of the Armada and Parma immediately leads to the fall of England and radically changes the course of history.
Did you see the look on their faces?
We must be careful.
After the fall of London and the establishment of Spanish garrisons in key ports across the country, the first consequences of the invasion unfolded rapidly and affected not only England, but all of Northern Europe. The first step was the Catholic Restoration. Philip II, pursuing religious goals, would immediately proclaim his candidate for the throne, probably someone from the Habsburgs or the heirs of Mary Stuart, but only under strict Spanish protectorate, and the Anglican Church, created by the Tudors, would be outlawed. Systematic religious purges would have begun. Protestant bishops and priests would have either fled or been arrested. The lands confiscated from Catholic monasteries during the reigns of Henry VIII and Elizabeth would have been returned to the Church, causing a huge redistribution of property and outrage among landowners. But Spain had enough power to suppress any resistance. The Protestant nobility, including the influential Cecil and Bacon families, would lose their titles and lands, and their places would be taken by loyal Catholics or Spanish grandees, leading to a profound Hispanicization of the ruling elite. England would effectively become a military base in Springboard controlled from Brussels or even Madrid. The success of the Armada would have immediately put an end to Philip II's two most serious problems. First, the private English fleet and its sea dogs would have been either destroyed or forced to flee and become outlaws without the support of the crown, and now Spain's silver fleets could sail the Atlantic and Caribbean in relative safety, ensuring a steady flow of precious metals into the Spanish treasury and prolonging Spain's golden age. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly in geopolitical terms, the rebellion in the Netherlands would have been doomed as the Dutch United Provinces, deprived of England's main financial, military, and diplomatic support, would have found themselves in a hopeless situation, and Spain would have been able to use English ports to blockade and directly invade Dutch territory. The Duke of Parma, whose army had already conquered England, would quickly complete the conquest of the northern Netherlands, which would mean that Holland, which in our history became a world trading and colonial power of the 17th century, would not have emerged as an independent state. Spain would gain access to Dutch shipbuilding technology, their trade networks, and, most importantly, their vast experience in maritime trade, which would further strengthen its global hegemony. As a result of these early effects, the entire geopolitical axis of Northern Europe would shift. Instead of the confrontation between Spain and England, Holland, we would have a single powerful Catholic bloc controlling the entire northern sea route and the Atlantic. After establishing itself in the British Isles, Spain would not make the mistake of relying on one-off expeditions. England's military technological potential would be immediately integrated into the Spanish military machine. This chapter analyzes how England would have become a permanent military base for the Habsburgs. The Spanish would have learned a critical lesson from the naval battles of 1588. Their massive galleons were inferior to English ships in speed and artillery power. And instead of abandoning English technology, Philip II would have ordered the standardization and modernization of his fleet using the English base. English shipyards in Plymouth, Portsmouth, and Woolwich, known for their high-quality oak and shipbuilders, would have been nationalized and placed under the direct control of Spanish quartermasters. A merger would have taken place. Spanish expertise in building large, reliable transport ships, important for ocean crossings, would have been combined with English know-how in low-profile, heavier artillery, and improved hydrodynamics. The result would be a new type of galleon, faster, better armed, but retaining capacity for terces. And these new ships, based in England, would form the basis of a permanent North Sea fleet that would control all approaches to the continent. At the same time, repair discipline would be perfected according to the Spanish model: strict accounting of materials, centralized supply of gunpowder and food, and the construction of huge standardized docks. To ensure control over England, Spanish engineers would begin a large-scale program of fortification works. Key ports, Dover, Plymouth, Calais, which Spain could take from France or buy through a treaty, would be turned into impregnable fortresses built of stone based on the best Italian and American forts. These star-shaped fortifications, Traccia Italiana, would allow small garrisons to control vast territories, and the basis of the land occupation would be 5,000 to 10,000 tercios, permanently stationed in England, whose machine discipline and high professional training would be unmatched. The Spanish army would establish clear standards of supply, vitualla, regular food deliveries, standardized pay, which would prevent looting, and a strict internal hierarchy. The presence of the tercios in England, unlike their permanent quartering in the Netherlands, would be strategically advantageous, as they would be closer to France, the Habsburgs' main continental rival, thus turning England into a well-defended military outpost of the Spanish Empire. The success of the Armada would have meant not just victory in a local conflict, but a fundamental shift in the global balance of power, which would have made the 17th century not the age of France or Britain, but a continuation of the Habsburg era. The conquest of England and the subjugation of the Netherlands would have created a huge continuous Catholic bloc stretching from the Mediterranean to the North Sea, and the Pax Hispanica, the period of Spanish domination, would have lasted much longer than in our history. France would have been isolated. France, which in our history became Spain's main rival, would have found itself completely surrounded by Habsburg possessions, Spain, Italy, the Netherlands, and now England. Philip II and then his successors could have actively interfered in the internal affairs of France, using the religious wars between Catholics and Huguenots. Kings of France, such as Henry IV, who in our history managed to unite the country, would in this scenario have been forced to accept the humiliating terms of the Habsburgs, and their foreign policy would have been completely paralyzed. This would have delayed the establishment of French absolutism and prevented France from becoming the leading power in Europe in the 17th century. As for the fate of the 30 Years' War, without the financial and political support of England and independent Holland, the Protestant principalities in Germany would have been much weaker. In the 30 Years' War, your 1618-1648, which in our history led to the complete devastation of Central Europe, would either not have taken place on such a scale or would have ended in a quick and complete victory for the Emperor and the Catholic League. This would have meant the complete triumph of the Counter-Reformation, and the Holy Roman Empire would not have broken up into a multitude of independent states. Having stabilized Western Europe and secured its American riches, Spain could have devoted far more resources to fighting the Ottoman Empire. Having gained control of the maritime resources of England and Holland, the Habsburgs could have dominated the Mediterranean. This could have led to more decisive victories over the Ottomans, possibly even driving them out of North Africa or leading to the earlier liberation of Hungary, which would have radically changed the ethnic and religious map of Eastern Europe. The geopolitical map of the world would have become a unified, conservative Catholic field, where Spain would have dictated the rules of the game. The internal transformation of England under Spanish protectorate would have been profound and would have encompassed all spheres of life, from law to social structure, and the English political system, based on common law, unique in Europe, and a constantly strengthening parliament, would have been eliminated. Parliament, a bastion of free thought and the Protestant aristocracy, would have been either dissolved or turned into a purely formal body, rubber stamping the decisions of a puppet king. Absolutism would have been established. The King of England would have ruled according to the model of Spanish absolutism, relying on a strong secret council and an occupying army, and a system of centralized bureaucracy copied from Madrid would have been introduced in the country. The Inquisition as an instrument of power. The Catholic Church would have regained its position, and although the Spanish Holy Inquisition would not have had direct control, its English counterpart would have become a powerful instrument of political control, whose main task would have been to eradicate Protestant heresy, confiscate the property of heretics, and maintain ideological purity. This would have led to mass emigration or the underground existence of Protestant dissidents, especially Puritans. The decline of common law, the unique English law based on precedent and the independence of the jury, would have been gradually replaced by continental Roman law, adapted by Spanish codification, and this would have deprived England of the foundation for the development of liberal institutions and the protection of private property, which in our history stimulated the Industrial Revolution. The social structure of England would have been fragmented. The old Protestant aristocracy, whose wealth was based on secularized church lands, would have become a class of outcasts, and their place would be taken by new Catholic nobles and grandees, leading to the formation of an Anglo-Spanish elite, where knowledge of Spanish and membership in the Jesuit or Franciscan orders would be the key to power. However, the complete eradication of Protestantism would have been impossible. In rural areas and among the lower classes, a kind of religious syncretism would arise, where outward observance of Catholic rites, worship of saints' mass, would mask the Protestant ideology of personal faith and Bible reading, and these secret Protestants would become a constant source of underground resistance and discontent. Ireland as an ally. Ireland, which in our history has always been a rebellious colony, would become a loyal, reliable ally of the Spanish crown in this world, as Philip II, as a defender of the Catholic faith, would grant Ireland greater autonomy and use it as a base for recruiting loyal Catholic troops, which would forever change the fate of the British Isles. The most radical and long-term consequences of the Armada's victory would have been felt in the New World, where the disappearance of England as a colonial power would have left a vacuum that would have been filled by Spain or France. Without a surviving Protestant England, the waves of Puritans, Quakers, and other religious dissidents who founded colonies in New England would not have existed. These people, if not executed by the Inquisition, would have fled to northern Germany or Scandinavia, but not to America. Northern New Spain would have emerged in place of future New England. Spain, already controlling the vast riches of Peru and Mexico, would have seen North America as a less priority territory. The colonization of the East Coast, from modern Maine to Florida, would have been slow, financed not by private companies but by the Crown and the Church, and would have focused on two things: fur trapping and evangelizing the indigenous population. Instead of developing self-governing farming settlements, as in our history, Spain would have spread the encomienda or mission system to the north. Missionaries, Jesuits, Franciscans, would have established fortified presidios, forts, and missions, where the indigenous population would have been forcibly assimilated. They would have been taught Spanish, Catholicism, and European agriculture. This would have been a model of exploitation rather than displacement, but with extremely slow growth of the European population. There would have been a geographical division. North America would have been divided into zones of influence. Spain would have controlled the East Coast, Atlantic, France, Canada, St. Lawrence River Valley, and the Great Lakes, creating a permanent line of tension between the two Catholic powers. The architectural and cultural landscape would have been entirely Romanesque. North American cities would have been built not of wood, like the settlements of New England, but of stone and adobe, baked clay, modeled on South American and Spanish colonial architecture. The Baroque and Renaissance styles would have dominated monumental cathedrals, covered galleries, central squares, plazas mayores, and seminaries. Catholic universities and seminaries modeled on Salamanca would become centers of education, where the main subjects would be Latin classics, theology, scholastic philosophy, and Roman law. The ideas of liberalism and the Enlightenment, which originated in Protestant universities, Harvard, Yale, would have no fertile ground. As an example of the future, instead of Boston and New York, we would have large port cities such as Santiago de Virginia or Nueva Cordoba, representing fortified administrative and ecclesiastical centers that would be less dynamic but more integrated into the global Spanish trade network. Let us look at the final picture on the horizon of 500 to 1,000 years. The absence of the British Empire and Anglo-Saxon domination would have changed the fundamental institutions and demographics of the world. In terms of institutions, technology, and law, without the English and Dutch revolutions, which established the ideas of parliamentarianism, human rights, and constitutional monarchy, the world would have remained more inclined toward absolutism and centralized power. Continental Roman law would have become the dominant legal system throughout the world, reinforcing a hierarchical, less flexible society. Delayed Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, which in our history was stimulated by competition between England, Holland, and France, as well as a Protestant ethic focused on profit and innovation, would have been significantly delayed. The dominant Spanish economic model, based on monopoly control of raw materials and bureaucratic management, would not have encouraged technological breakthroughs, and technological centers such as Glasgow or Manchester would simply not have emerged. and the world would have been richer in precious metals but poorer in steel, steam, and machinery. The largest centers of urbanization would have been in the Romance countries: Mexico City, Lima, Seville, Paris, but their development would have been slower and more conservative. The confessional and linguistic map would also have changed. Global Catholicism would have meant that the confessional map of the world would have been almost entirely Catholic, and Christianity would have spread exclusively through Catholic missions, while Protestantism would have remained a regional phenomenon in Scandinavia or in the form of underground sects in Germany and England. Dominance of Romance languages. Spanish and French would become the dominant world languages, especially in America, while English, deprived of its imperial status, would remain a regional language spoken only by the inhabitants of the British Isles under the strong influence of Spanish and Latin. The main points of tension would have shifted. Instead of Anglo-French or Anglo-German confrontation, the world would have been divided into two camps: the Habsburg Catholic bloc, Spain, England, the Netherlands, the Empire, and the French monarchy, which, being surrounded, would constantly seek alliances with the Ottoman Empire or Sweden to oppose the Habsburgs. The British Isles would have become a permanent but ineffective hotbed of national religious resistance, constantly suppressed by Spanish garrisons, which would have made them a Catholic Siberia. Comparing the final picture with the history we know shows how critical the defeat of the Armada was. It was not just a naval battle, it was a clash between two models of civilization. In our history, England's victory established a model based on Protestantism, encouraging personal initiative, literacy, and capitalism; common law, protecting private property, which stimulated investment and industrialization; and maritime trade, developing decentralized, risky entrepreneurship. In an alternate reality, the Armada's victory would have established a model based on Catholic absolutism, centralization of power, restriction of personal initiative in favor of state or church control; Roman law, a hierarchical system more oriented toward the state than individual rights; and resource control, monopoly trade in raw materials from the colonies, which would have stifled domestic industrial development. This scenario clearly demonstrates how the slightest shift, a few days of favorable weather, better coordination between admirals, could have had enormous consequences, and a successful landing of the tercios in 1588 would have prevented not only the British Empire, but also the entire era of liberalism and capitalism that shaped our world. Instead of English liberty, the world would have had Spanish order, stable, conservative, and Catholic. A world much more like medieval Europe in terms of political institutions, but with global reach. The story we have traced is a logical exercise in cause and effect, based on a single premise: the successful coordination of forces in favorable weather for the Spanish Armada in 1588, and our present, based on the failure of that invasion, is the product not so much of military genius as of a confluence of circumstances that gave tiny England a chance. An alternative scenario, in which Spanish tercios established themselves in the British Isles, paints a picture of a world where Habsburg and Catholic Orthodoxy continue to dominate for several centuries. And this world, deprived of the Anglo-Saxon foundations of common law, parliamentary tradition, and the Industrial Revolution, would be more centralized, slower in technological development, and globally Catholic. Instead of becoming the cradle of liberal ideas, North America would have become a vast, slowly developing Catholic outpost, ruled from Seville and Madrid, and the victory of the Armada would have meant that the fundamental values on which modern Western civilization stands, personal freedom and capitalist enterprise, would not have been born on the banks of the Thames, but would have been suppressed for several centuries, showing how fragile our historical heritage is, and that the fate of civilization can depend on such a fleeting factor as the direction of the wind in the English Channel. Subscribe so you don't miss new versions of history